I am Susie Lyon with Hello Switzerland, here today to talk about insurance in Switzerland. It can be a little overwhelming arriving in Switzerland and discovering that there are multiple must-have insurances that are a requirement for living and working here, from basic and accident insurances to what you need to drive a car and how to protect your contents. We will briefly be covering all these insurances and more to give you an insight into what's needed, what's recommended, and what it all means. To give us that insight, we will be chatting today to Marcus from Helvetia, one of the leading insurance companies in Switzerland with 160-year history and serving 1.3 million customers. They have a specialist team for international professionals, so talking to them will clear your mind of any of your insurance concerns. A little bit about me. I am an Australian and have lived here in Switzerland for 7 years with my husband and 2 kids. My husband's work brought us here, and I have spent my time here meeting and creating stories with expats from all walks of life, but especially those who have had to reinvent themselves with new languages, new careers, and new ways of living. This webinar is brought to you by Hello Switzerland, and its aim is to answer the main questions you might have about insurance in Switzerland. So, hi Marcus, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi everybody, my name is Marcu Vinti. I'm responsible for the expat team by Helvetia Insurance since about 2 years. We've been working for Helvetia around 7.5 years now. Prior to that, I worked for other insurance brokers and insurances, as well as been living 11 years in the UK, in London, working for consulting companies. So I've been an expat myself. I grew up in Rome, in Italy, up to the age of 15, and then I moved to Switzerland to study here.
Awesome. So you've got that whole expat experience as well, so you can definitely help us today.
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome. So let's get started. There are some insurances in Switzerland that are compulsory. You have to have them no matter what if you live and work here. So let's start with those.
Exactly, Susan. So the first and the foremost, the most important is the basic health insurance, KVG called LAMAL. It's compulsory for everybody coming to live in Switzerland. You have to, it's kind of an indirect tax on health. We've got some clients that have got an expat contract, so they're not under the Swiss social security system, but they need to have the basic health insurance as well. You can have an exemption for the basic health insurance if you've got this an expat contract that you're coming from abroad. You can have an exemption. You can apply for an exemption. You don't have to pay for it. But anybody with a local contract in Switzerland, they need to have the basic health insurance, which makes sure that everybody that lives here has got a certain basic cover for hospital and outpatients. Then we're talking also about the accident insurance. If somebody works in Switzerland, then the employer will cover for the accident. If somebody does not work, then they can include the accident cover within the health insurance so that the person is covered for illness and health.
So there are some other insurances that aren't really compulsory unless it depends on your personal situation. So let's talk about those ones as well.
This is correct. If somebody buys a car in Switzerland or imports a car from abroad, there is a motor vehicle liability insurance, which is compulsory. This one covers any damages to other cars and people. So it's people bodily injury, and it's covered for the whole of Europe. So if you got an accident outside Switzerland, it covers also for that. Obviously, most of our clients and people that live here, they've got a new car or almost a new car. If you've got a leasing car, you need to have also fully comprehensive insurance. But the fully comprehensive and the partially comprehensive insurance, depending on if you've got a leasing car, how old your car is, and so forth. But I would say 80–90% of people that live here have got a fully comprehensive, so it covers also the damages of your own car.
Oh, that's good.
And exactly. Then you've got the building liability insurance. If you're a tenant, you don't need that, but if you're an owner of a flat or a house, you need the liability insurance. This is important. I mean, if you've got if you live in a multiple flat with many flats and they're all owners, then you have a collective liability insurance that covers the whole building. So there is one provider for all of them, and then you're paying a part of the premium. If you live in a detached house, you've got your own villa, for instance, a detached house, then you need to apply for your own liability insurance. And this is for us an example. A typical example is you have to make sure that the path to your house, the door, is free of ice or snow. So if the postman is coming and slips and breaks, let's say, the foot, or something falls from the top of the roof, you're responsible for any injuries that may cause. So that's why that's important to have as well.
I can see why that one would be very important to have, because especially when it gets a little icy here in Switzerland. So
absolutely.
Now that we've covered what you must have, those compulsory insurances in Switzerland, let's talk about the kind of the optional ones, the ones that you can choose if you'd like. So there's non-compulsory insurances can be kind of divided up into two categories, essential and then recommended. So let's start with essential. What is essential insurances?
So essential is the top up, the supplementary cover for health insurance. The basic health insurance has got a pretty good cover for anybody that lives in Switzerland, but depending on the needs, on the priorities of the individual, they might want to have this supplementary health insurance, which we very strongly recommend. The basic health insurance makes about 80-90% of the yearly premium, and the 10-20% is the supplementary health insurance. This gives you the option to have semi-private or private ward, to have certain dental covers, certain covers for, let's say, the braces for your children, so it gives you an added comfort and added coverage. Switzerland is, as you might know, is very expensive. So you never know what happens to you if you don't have the supplementary cover. You might have to pay for top up, for upgrades into semi-private and private ward, or repatriation costs. Certain costs, if it's an accident, then it's the company, the accident company that the person is working for that provides for that. But if it's an illness, then it's your private cover. And if you don't have this semi-private or private, and you have to pay for the top up, it might get quite expensive. We have also the third party liability, which is strongly recommended in Switzerland. I would say more than 2/3 or many landlords have that in the contract. So you have to have that. If you don't get the key of the flat. It doesn't cost a lot, it's not much. And this covers basically for any damage that you do to the flat, as well as any damages that you do, bodily injuries and property damages that you might cause worldwide. So it's not about only the flat, it covers for any damages that you or your children do to other people worldwide. And it's very important. And there, so depending from the insurance, you've got covers to 5-10 million. Usually advisable is to have a zero deductible, because there are some cases, some damages that cost only 300-400 Swiss francs, and will be a pity to pay, the insurance on a monthly basis, and you have to pay the deductible. So we advise there always to have a zero deductible with the private liability. This is not applicable when you're driving motorboats, cars, motorcycles. There is the liability of the vehicle you're driving. If you're as a person with a bike, or you're walking about, and for instance, you don't cross the zebra crossing and you hit a bicycle, then the person, let's say the bicycle is broken, the person has to go to the hospital. So the private liability pays the e-bike, the repair of the e-bike might cost 2,000-3,000 Swiss francs, as well as the hospitalization of the person. Why is it so high, 5 or 10 million? Because if there are bodily injuries and the person is, let's say, disabled and cannot work for half a year or a couple of years, then the private liability will make sure that it will replace the salary of the person. So that's why that's the reason why it can be so expensive. So the cover of the liability is so high. Then we have got the household contents insurance. Is also usually covered in the same policy as the private liability. The household contents insurance covers all the movable objects that you got in the house. So if you would turn your flat, your house upside down, and anything that falls down is covered against theft, water damage, fire, glass breakage, and it's within the house and also worldwide. So you've got simple theft at home, abroad. You're in San Francisco or somewhere abroad, and they break inside the hotel, the Airbnb where you are, then it's also covered there. Simple theft covers also if you're out and about, you're drinking a coffee in Zurich or Geneva, and they steal your iPhone in the bag, then it's also simple theft that is covered there. So the household contents insurance in some companies, and by Helvetia, for instance, it covers also pets insurance. So any hospitalization or outpatient treatment of your dog, of the cat, and any other animals you might have will be covered there. It's also advisable to have this cover because veterinary costs for animals in Switzerland are very expensive. And for a small premium per year, you can have quite a good cover for your pet.
Yeah, I have a puppy, so I know how important that one is, because you're absolutely right. The vet is expensive. Okay, so they're the essential insurances, not compulsory, but most people in Switzerland do take them out, and so they're considered those essential insurances. We also mentioned recommended insurances that are also not compulsory. Let's talk about the recommended insurances.
Sure. One of the most important recommended insurance, Susan, is the legal protection. The legal protection covers in case there is a dispute. Either you've been pursued by somebody else that you have to defend yourself, or for you to open a case against somebody else. And there is a legal protection in various kind of components that people can take on. It's against the employee, if you've got an issue with your employer, whatever issues you might be there. For motorists, you've got a car. The car insurance offers also an incorporated legal insurance, but usually it's capped at around 40,000-50,000 or something around that. With the legal insurance that you've got separately, if you've got an accident in the whole of Europe, then you've got a much higher cover. So there usually starts by 500,000 Swiss francs up to 1 million Swiss francs. And then also the component to cover you as a tenant. So you've got a problem with your landlord, then it comes to, you can use a lawyer for that. As well as if you're the owner of a flat and you're renting the flat to somebody else, so you've got an issue with the person that rents your property, then also you can use the lawyer. In Switzerland, like anywhere in the world, the lawyers are very expensive. Starts by 200-300 Swiss francs per hour. So for the premium that somebody pays by the various insurances in Switzerland, it's worth the money. Even if you use it once in 5 years, they take really the stress away from you with dealing with a certain situation. Then the comprehensive motor insurance is also important. Like I mentioned before, if somebody buys a leasing car, it's compulsory. You need to have a comprehensive cover that covers also damages to your car, covers also roadside assistance if you got injury, if you got damages to your tires, it will cover also for that. And these covers are very flexible. So it means once your car is not as new anymore, you can have a partially comprehensive cover. So you don't have to stick to fully comprehensive for the whole time. So it's very flexible. Then the rental security deposit is something that our customer welcome very much. Instead of basically blocking a very high amount to get the rental agreement, which is usually 3 months rent. Then you can do by Swiss insurances a rental deposit that basically you pay a certain premium per year. And then you don't have to pay this 3 months, the 3 rents that you have to block. So this is something also that people allow. Now, not every landlord is accepting that. There are some landlords, especially private people, not real estate companies, but private people, that they want to have the money that is blocked within a certain bank account. So it really depends from the landlord. Then life insurance, it's very important to understand if somebody comes from abroad, is if something happens to you, how I'm covered, how my children, my wife is covered, or the partner. This is also something very important to do. Insurance companies provide a gap analysis to see exactly what are the covers in case something would happen.
So that's legal protection insurance you mentioned actually personally came into benefit for me when we moved out of our house in Basel to a different house. We had a dispute with our landlord, and I was covered, and we had a lawyer that represented us, and it was actually awesome. So that was one that, it's a recommended one. It's one that we took out as a family, and for us, it really was beneficial. So you did mention life insurance there and third pillar systems. So what is important to know about those subjects? Because it is very comprehensive and detailed.
Absolutely. When we talk about life insurance, it's not only if somebody is deceased, but we're talking about three main topics. So it's about widower pension, it's about disability pension, if somebody's got disabled, has got an accident, and it's also about the savings component, the money that you put aside for old age, so that you have you can keep a certain standard of life. These are the three components of life insurance, which are very important. And insurance companies in Switzerland, like I mentioned before, you can have a gap analysis to understand really which gaps you might have when you're coming to Switzerland.
So tell me a little bit about this gap that can happen. You mentioned that there can be a gap in regards to savings and, that pension side. So give me a little bit more information on that.
Yeah. So in Switzerland, there is a three-pillar system, so-called three-pillar system. The first pillar is about the state pension, so the government. The second one is if somebody works, and the third one is the so-called the third pillar that covers that you can privately use to cover if there is any gaps between the first and the second one. Right. All three pillars cover the disability if somebody is passing away, so survivor and savings component. So if somebody comes to Switzerland, let's say with 35 years old or 40, and they want to stay in Switzerland, obviously in the first pillar, they've got a gap. They have never paid the full amount contributions like as Swiss citizens. Swiss citizens start savings with 24, 25 years old. So there is a gap they haven't paid for 10, 15 years. So obviously, if they want to stay, somebody wants to stay in Switzerland, but even if you're moving away after 5 or 7 years, it's always good to do some savings in the third pillar that you can deduct from the tax if you're working, so that if you're staying in Switzerland or you're moving to another country, you don't have a gap in the old age. The second very important topic is the two risks components, the disability and the survival insurance. If somebody is new in Switzerland, the first couple of years, there is almost no disability or survival insurance for the remaining partner. So there are only the contribution that somebody paid to the employer. So the employer pays a certain contribution, like a widower pension. And this might not for sure cover 100% of the need of the insured person. So if somebody, let's say, earns 10,000 Swiss francs per month, only, or 15,000, the second pillar, so the pension from the employer, might cover only 60-70% of it. Wow. Because it's like that. The more somebody earns, the less they get contribution also from the first pillar. Right. Because it's capped at around 2,000 Swiss francs. But so this is the very, very important to know that there may be some gaps. Obviously, if somebody has lived, let's say, 10 years in France or in Australia, you're from Australia, depending on the bilateral agreements that the country has with Switzerland, there might be also certain pensions, certain disability pensions or widower pensions that are flowing from this third country where the person lived before. But it very much depends from the bilateral agreements that Switzerland has with this country, or they might not have bilateral agreements with this country. So mostly from the European community, they've got bilateral agreements, but outside the European community, it might be more difficult that Switzerland has bilateral agreements. But there are some states that have that.
So really, it's very important to kind of understand where you're coming from and what gaps there might be when you have arrived and lived here for a little while. So very, very interesting.
Exactly.
I didn't know
Exactly.
about the bilateral agreements. That's very interesting to know.
This is something that is, the more somebody knows, the better it is, yeah.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked about the insurances, what they are and what ones are compulsory, what they're needed for. Let's talk about like the steps that you need to take in order to get those insurances when you arrive in Switzerland.
Yeah, first and foremost, the most important one is the health insurance. When people arrive, this is, you got 3 months time. After 3 months, you get a fine. So it's very important. It takes also a couple of weeks to do that, you know, so it's very important to settle down quickly with the health insurance. And within these 3 months, something that I didn't mention earlier, within these 3 months, if you have not signed the contract, but you have registered, you move to Switzerland, you still have a cover and you have to pay 3 months back. So this is something very important. And obviously the household private liability insurance, legal insurance eventually to have. And then within the first 6 months or 1 year, the earlier the better, to do a gap analysis. Most insurance companies offer that as a package, so there is no fees to pay for that. And then they make you a pension analysis from the first and second pillar, so that you can see, you know, which gaps you need to cover. And then the gaps that you need to cover could be then after 3-4 years, certain risks or certain things you don't need to cover anymore. So you can, you know, you can cancel certain insurances. So it's not something that you have to keep lifelong. Then obviously also to understand the Swiss social security system, how that works. Lots of information also on our Switzerland website, on other websites as well. But there is always, like I mentioned before, very important to have a consultation with an expert that really understands also the bilateral agreements, you know, and can give you a fully comprehensive 360-degree cover about, you know, what needs to be taken care of.
So let's talk about when someone should talk to someone like yourself, an advisor, and, you know, to get that information. I mean, technically you probably could do it all on your own. You'd be able to be researching for hours and hours and days, weeks and weeks. So when would it be an advisable time to talk to an expert? You know,
yeah, absolutely. There are certain situations in life that happen, and then this should trigger the person to contact the insurance, their own insurance company. Is, let's say, if a child is born, if, for instance, you get an inheritance, if you lose your job or you're becoming independent, you're creating your own company, absolutely. If you're buying property, you know, this is also an important thing that you should get in touch with an insurance, because there is an impact on that. And then, yeah, family situation is leaving, for instance, the children are moving abroad again, or for instance, your wife does not work and live in Switzerland anymore. So any life situations that are changing, you better ask your insurance company, and then they might tell you, look, there is nothing to take care of, it's everything okay, or they will make you understand, they will give you an insight about certain things that you have to look at. So it's rather you get in touch with the insurance company and they will let you know exactly what to do.
Yeah, good advice, because when you do have one of those life changes, it can, like you say, it can change a whole, you know, bunch of things in terms of your insurance. We know that happened to us when we bought a property. So let's talk about that, because you mentioned, you know, if you are buying a property. So let's talk about that briefly. So can international professionals use their insurance savings to buy a property?
Yes. First and foremost, very important is always what residence permit they have. You know, there is a B permit that's on a yearly basis. It's you know, prolonged, or the C permit after 5 years. So depending on the institutions, there are banks or pension funds that lend money to buy property. So this is something very important to understand very early in the canton that you're living and so forth. There might be some restrictions. And with regards to insurance, yeah, you can use the second pillar, so the pension of the company. On the pension statement that people receive on a yearly basis, there is a component that tells you about the funds that you might use from the second pillar to put as a capital to buy property. In Switzerland, typically 80% you can have a mortgage and 20% you have to bring as a capital yourself. This is the say the minimum. Out of this 20%, 10% can come from the pension, and the other 10% is cash, or you can use also money from the third pillar. So if you have saved money for 4 or 5 years in the third pillar, you can use this money to also to put for this 20% to buy property in Switzerland. By buying a property is also with regards to the situation at the moment compared to renting. To rent you pay more than if you buy, because at the moment the financial situation allows people to buy a very low interest rate, and then the property belongs to you, and you don't have this high rents that you have to pay 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 Swiss francs. Typically, after 1, 2, 3 years, people that are living in Switzerland decide if they buy or not to buy. But they think it's usually a good investment. Important to say is to look at if you're sure that you're staying in Switzerland, obviously, but if you're not sure, always to look for a provider that provides you a mortgage that is, you don't have to pay any fine in case after a couple of years, whatever, you live in Switzerland and you have to sell the property. And very important, the funds from the second and third pillar can only be used for property that you live yourself in. And it has to be in Switzerland. So you cannot buy a nice chalet in Verbier or somewhere else, to ski and then use the money for that, or from some property you want to buy abroad outside Switzerland. This is not possible.
So there's a lot of things that we've covered today in terms of the insurances that are compulsory, things that are definitely recommended and most people in Switzerland do take out, as well as those essential insurances as well. We've also briefly covered some very comprehensive information about pillars, third pillars, second pillars first, as well as buying property. But let us know, Marcus, if someone is watching this and thinks, oh, you know what, that's something I'm interested in, I need more information about that. How would they get in contact with someone like yourself, an expert who can give them detailed information that's really relevant to that person?
On the Hello Switzerland website, there's going to be a contact that you can use. And then depending where you're living in Switzerland, we've got around 35 consultants in Valais, in Geneva, Zurich, Zug, Basel, Ticino. So we've got scattered all over Switzerland professionals speak good English. And we are very much trained about understanding and knowing the international as well as the Swiss insurance covers, so we can help you there and address the needs, because it's always about the needs of the customer, what they want, the specific situation, which is very much different from one person to the other. So you can get in touch with us, and usually within 24 to 48 hours we get in touch, and we can have a consultation online, by phone, or in person.
That's great. Marcus, thank you so much for giving us that insight into insurance and living in Switzerland. Thank you so much. And
you're welcome. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye, everybody.